Introduction to Social Work Documentation. Before we get right into the documentation, we're going to take a look at a few of the functions related to the SCM front page here. There is a base profile usually applied to your SCM accounts that gives you some default settings, such as the icons that are showing up in this main toolbar. There are a number of preferences that you can adjust to your own liking, and we're going to take a look at a few of those. So on this top row here on the word preferences, if you click, there are a number of different preference options. We're going to start by looking at toolbar preferences. The main toolbar is this top row up here with the icons in it. Icons that are selected to be displayed are in the right-hand column. Other available icons are on the left-hand column. There are a number of functions that we're not using in SCM at this time, so those icons are not showing up in the column. As we add functionality, you may want to add those shortcuts into your primary main toolbar. There is also toolbar preferences for your main toolbar and tab toolbar. The tab toolbar are when they're icons that are displayed underneath this row of file folder tabs here, and you will see those from time to time. The two options here are that you can show the text to labels, and that's the words, so that they show up underneath your icons so that you can see them without hovering over the top of them. And you can change the size of the icons from large icons to small icons. We usually set them as large by default, but if I set them to small icons and no text labels, if you watch that main toolbar up there, you'll see it changes to the small icons and no text labels. So depending what size screen you're working on and the real estate you have, you may want to make those adjustments. If you hover over the icons, it will tell you what they refer to. The next preference that we're going to take a look at is something called acronym expansion. So when you're typing into your free text fields in your documents, acronyms are highly controlled within the Sask Health Authority, and it's a difficult habit to break to change how we enter our words or use our shortcuts. So SCM allows you to create those shortcuts and use them so that they create full acronyms when you're typing in. So if you have a sort of standard text that you normally use, you could create an acronym for that. So to create a new acronym, you click on Add. And I'll say I use refer to, I do r/t. And I'm typing that with small lowercase letters. The acronyms are case sensitive, as is the expanded text. So when I type a lowercase r and a /lowercase t, I want the system to type out referred to with lower cases. And then I say OK, it becomes part of my acronym list. Then when I am in a document and I type referred to and hit enter or space, it will put out the full context of the word. They're not limited to a couple words. They can be full sentences, they can be short paragraphs, whatever you would like to have as your acronym. Acronyms can also be imported from one user to another. So if your team got together and decided on a certain number of acronyms or certain acronyms that are very common to everybody, one person would just have to sit down and enter them all, and then the next users would be able to come to this bottom bar here, select import from other users, and then the bar basically turns into a list of all other users that have created some acronyms. You would click on a user, and then you would see the different acronyms that they had created. And if there were some that were applicable to your role that you would use, you would just check them off. And then they become part of your list. If you wanted to edit any of these acronyms, you would highlight it and go to edit. You can't edit the short version of the acronym, but you can edit the expanded text that is linked to that acronym. The acronyms are case sensitive, so any two-letter acronym could have up to 4 combinations. So 2 uppercase, 2 lowercase, first letter uppercase, or second letter uppercase. And each of those could have a different expanded text. Some locations advise putting a dot or period in front of any of your acronyms. That's not been our typical practice here in Prince Albert, but you do need to be aware that there are some acronyms that are also words. So the letters I and T can be an acronym for information technology, or it could be the word IT. If you want the system to recognize the word it as it, and then IT as an acronym, when you create that acronym, you would just put a dot in front of it and then the IT. And so the system would know when you put the dot IT, it would want you to use the expanded text. But when you type just IT with no dot, it would use it as the word it. Before we go on to the next preference, which is going to be about document entry, I'm going to take a look at where you would go to start or pick a document to chart on. So if you want to create a new document to chart on, you're always going to go to this icon in the tab toolbar that's called Enter Document. And when you initially click on it, your list of documents will be blank. It defaults on the side here to Personal Documents, but we haven't set that up as a preference, so it will be blank. You can always search for documents by typing in the free text field, the search field at the top here. And all the social work documents start with SW. And so if you type that in, it's going to show you all those social work documents. But we can set your personal documents as your preferences so that you don't have to search for your documents every time you're going to open a new one. To set that preference, we're going to go to Preferences and Document Entry. And then you have some options to find your documents. We're inpatient, and there's social work there as a separate field. So you're going to highlight the documents and add them onto that right side column. And you need to add them individually. So even though you will use these documents possibly in an outpatient setting like ambulatory care or in the emergency department, they're all listed under as inpatient documents because any registration that you would be charting on would be a registered visit. Then we say close, and now the next time we go to this Enter Document tab, your documents are listed there as the default. The next thing we're going to take a look at is how you access your patients. So currently PCCs and ACAP are used to using the status boards, but there's another option to viewing patients, and that's called a patient list. So when you're on your first tab, ED Status Board, below it you'll see a button for Patient List, and that's how you can toggle back and forth between the two. Initially, when you click on Patient List, you'll have no list. This is a temporary list, and it's just showing the last patient we had selected on the status board. This list disappears each time you log out. You can create what we call criteria-based lists and also personal lists. And to create a new visit list, you go to the first tab toolbar icon that says New Visit List. You'll notice that there's a number of tabs with which you can create parameters for your own list. So for physicians, they can assign themselves, I want to see the list where I'm the family care provider, or I want to see the list where I'm the attending physician. Generally, we start with the location, and it's always the third circle down, include patients at selected location only. You would expand Victoria Hospital, and then you would probably expand to Victoria Hospital inpatient, and then select a unit. You can add multiple units, or you can do them as single units. If I select 5-med and add it to the right-hand side, that's the unit that will be showing on my patient list. Providers, so it can be specific providers for specific roles. We don't have the service functionality set up yet. And then the visit status. So right now it's set to default to list currently admitted or registered patients. But if you want to take a look at last week and see which patients were discharged to make sure you didn't miss anything, you can always uncheck that. Say list patients with a specified event on a certain date range, and then you can pick discharged or registered or whatever, and then you can go, I want to see the patients discharged today or yesterday, or you can select a date range and you can say from 10 days ago, or you can use the actual dates and it'll give you a calendar. When you create that list with these parameters and say OK, that list becomes a list that will always update based on those parameters. So I'm going to return it to list currently admitted patients to level 5. It'll ask you to name the list. This is your own list for your own viewing only, so you can call it what you want. And now I have a list of the actively admitted patients on level 5. There's a set columns that show when you first log in, and you can adjust those by going to the select visit column. And again, you've got the left-hand side, which are all columns available, right-hand side, the ones that are displaying when you first log in. Some of these you won't find useful at all, so you can remove them. And maybe you want the age to show on that column, so you can add it. And if you want it to come up underneath the patient's name, you can adjust its placement in the columns by using the arrows. We can make some custom columns, so we can make a column if you wanted to enter free text into it to leave some comments for other people to see or look at on that patient. That is an option as well. When we say OK, it adjusts the columns to our preference. And it's similar to the status board, except it's just a cleaner view. You don't have all the other alerts and stuff on there. If you want to make a custom list, you can select certain patients. So if there's patients that you're following, and maybe there's 60 patients admitted or 30 patients admitted on the unit, and you're following 10 of them, you can make a shorter list that is easier to navigate. So you can use your control button on your keyboard to select the patients that you're following, and then you would go save selected patients, and you're going to give it a new list name. You'll notice that the name of this list has a little asterisk in the name. And if I go back to my level 5 list, there is no asterisk by the name. So a list that has no asterisk beside it acts on the parameters that you set when you created it. So it's always going to show the currently registered patients on level 5. If you had added a parameter to show the patients that were discharged 10 days ago, that list would update every day or any time a discharge happened to show the patients that had been discharged within the last 10 days. Once it's past 10 days, those patients would fall off the list. So with this actively registered one, when they're registered, they're on the list. When they're discharged, they disappear from the list. For lists that you save specifically for your own, and they have the asterisk, these lists you have control over. So if you were following these people this week and you were off for the weekend and you came back and they had been discharged over the weekend, they would no longer be on the level 5 list, but they would still be on this list. Maybe they were transferred to another unit. That is what you would see on this list here. So you would see that this patient was now in the ICU, or that they were discharged and not admitted. Once you were done following that patient, you would highlight them and then select the icon for remove selected visits, and then that patient would fall off the list. If you need to add a new one, you would go back to your level 5 list, highlight it on the list, save selected patients. You would want to add it to your currently selected list, and OK, and then that patient would show up on the list. So you can control the list. So asterisk, you control them. No asterisk, they are by parameter controlled, so the selections you've made. Anytime you're going to begin charting on a patient, you need to make sure you've selected the right patient and the right visit. So if a patient you saw in the emergency department was then admitted, but some of the work that you did you need to chart in the emergency department, then you would need to make sure you've selected the right visit. So if I go back to the status board, probably not going to have a very good example here, but if I select this patient, this number here where it says 2015, I believe our new ones all start with 2016 right now. That's called the visit number. And those are created with any new registration at the front desk. So when a person's in the emergency department, they have a visit number. When they are admitted as an inpatient, they are discharged from the ER and then registered as an inpatient, and it's a new number. In the electronic system, that's how it links all the pieces of that visit. So different chart notes, lab results, diagnostic imaging results and things like that are all connected by that visit number to be attached to that encounter the patient's had in our system. If I go to this tab that says Patient Info, and I would select on the left-hand side here, Visit History, I would get a list of all the visits or registrations the patient has had into the Victoria Hospital. And this list goes back to as far as 2011. You would want to make sure you have the right visit. So if they are an inpatient or maybe they were discharged and you have to do some charting on them to finish up, you want to make sure that you have the right, it's an inpatient visit or it's an emergency room visit. And if you select this visit off this list in the visit history, it's not going to change the number up here. If it's a discharge visit, you would need to search for that patient or that visit to find the visit. And you would use that by using this tool up here for Find Patient. When you click on that, it brings up a search window. You can search by regional ID. You can search by health number. And just a heads up, if you're searching by a health number, in the search field, you always have to put SK in front of it. Or if it's a federal penitentiary number, it starts with some letters and you have to add the first 2 letters of those letters in the front before you enter the rest of it in order for it to search. If you want to search by their chart number or unit number, that's known as the VHID. And then their regional number is what it defaults to. That is the number that's showing here. I believe it is on the addressographs as well. Or you can search by name and birth date. So once I've picked a patient off my list, I can highlight them. And then if they've had visits to the hospital, we'll have a button Show Visits that highlights. I click on it and it's going to show me the different visits. So there was an outpatient visit in Amcare and there was an emergency room visit. And I would want to pick the one, okay. And now this number would have changed to reflect that. And then I would know when I start charting, I'm charting on that visit. In most cases, you're going to be charting on active visits that are on the board here. But if somebody is discharged and you need to add some extra information, you will need to use the Find Patient to search for them in the system and do your charting. Now we'll start to take a look at entering documents. So on the status board, you're going to highlight your patient. Up in this blue header up here, it will have the information of the patient you've selected and the chart that you're reviewing or documenting on. So that's your double check. And then you're going to go to this icon, Enter Document. The notes that we're going to take a look at today and that have been created for the social worker or role is the social work progress notes, the social work renal initial assessment, the case conference note, the encounter note, and the regular initial assessment. So we got renal initial assessment and a general initial assessment. Looking at the top section here, that's gray, before you start charting in it, most of the time you won't adjust anything on this section, but there may be times where you're doing a delayed or a late entry, or you're having to enter some documents that maybe were somebody else didn't have access. They charted on paper and you're helping to enter their information in. The date of service is when you had the encounter or interaction with the patient, and the authored date and time is when the document was actually created. So if the encounter with the patient was a number of hours ago, you would adjust this time here to reflect when the encounter or the service was performed for the patient. But we're doing our documentation now, so that is when the document is being authored. If you're entering it, which in 99.9% of the cases you will be, you are the authored, so it's authored by me. And we'll talk about co-signatures a little bit later. This may or may not be something you decide to use as a department, and it's usually linked to learners. It's not a requirement for your role, but it's an option. So once you're got that information correct at the top, then you can select a document. We're going to start with the initial assessment and click Open. In most cases, when you first start using the system, it's going to open in a smaller window than full screen. You can use the maximize button there or double click in the bar and open it to full screen. I'm going to talk about some of the different components or pieces of the document itself. We'll start up at the top here, and you can see that date of service and time that we looked at in that initial box is also available to adjust from within the document. On the left-hand side, there are two tabs, and they also are the first one is very reflective of that top. So if I hover over document info, I can adjust that author date and time, who the author was, and assign cosigners from this spot as well. So you have it both when you go to initially launch the document, and then from within the documents itself, you can still make those modifications. The second tab is a Sections tab, and this helps you to quickly navigate through your documents, and it's a very useful tab. The first time you log in to create a new document, it will be minimized. If you hover over the tab, up in the top bar where it says Sections, there's a little tack or a pin, and you can click on it. It will pin that Sections open. You can resize it to what works best for you, and then it allows you to navigate. And it will stay there anytime you open any new documents in the future once you've done that. Next part we'll look at is this row of tabs at the top of the document, and these are general functions. So copy forward is how you can bring information forward from one similar note to another. So if you had a patient that had been admitted and you'd completed an initial assessment a few weeks ago and they're back in for readmission, and a lot of the information is unchanged, you would be able to click on this copy forward. There would be a list of documents here for social work, and if you had created a initial assessment, you would be able to select it on this list. It would display over here anything that was in the note, and in the center you would expand it, and there would be one of these check boxes for every section that you had completed some information on. So any of the ones in the old note that you would like to bring forward into the new note, you would just put a check mark in, and then you would click copy items into current note, and it would bring that information forward into your next note. Refer to note is very similar to copy forward. If you make a selection and bring it into a new note, it will be acknowledged as a reference from a previous note unless you make any edits to it. So if you brought forward some free text from a progress note and then added a number or a date within that field, it would no longer refer to the old note because it had been changed information. Preview allows you to set a preview on the side or the bottom of your screen so that you can actually see in real time what your note is going to look like as you're entering information in it. Modify template. This list of items in the sections panel over here is the template or the sections that are available for you to document in. Sometimes in some notes, there's some information or sections that are rarely documented in, so we don't put them in the front end all the time. But you can add them in if there's something that you would need in the future. So if you click on Modify Template, it basically brings up the template of the note and all the sections. And as you can see in this one, they are all checked off. There is one in there that is not checked off. That's called electronic record remediation. And that is if an analyst has to come in and do some remediation on a note. Most often that would occur in the case where there was a wrong registered patient and documentation had been on the wrong patient and it needed to be transferred to the correct patient. And then analysts will go in and correct that and leave a note. So then when we click on this and say, okay, it adds another field to the note. And that's this remediation where we're able to make a comment on the note as to why we had to cancel it or transfer it or move it to another patient. If you find that when you are documenting, there's certain sections in the note that you never ever use, you can actually uncheck them and save the template for yourself. One thing to keep in mind is if we do make changes or additions to the note, they wouldn't automatically, or into that section that you had unchecked, it wouldn't automatically re-add it to the note. You have to manually keep track of it. Acronym expansion is also available from within the note. So we took a look at acronym expansion in the main preference area when you would be setting up your primary acronyms. But if you find you're in the middle of charting information and you are using an acronym that you hadn't put into your acronyms, you could add it on the fly. So you would just select it, copy it with the Control V or right click and copy, go to acronym expansion, add a new one, paste it in there. Put in your expanded text, okay, okay. And now as soon as I hit space in here, it's going to spell out my whole expanded text. So you can build your foundational acronyms working on the front end from preferences, but you can also add them on the fly from within the document. These arrows are not available in all documents, but they basically allow you to go from one of these sections to the next. In some notes, all these sections are open and you would scroll through a very long note. In most of the social worker notes, they are all individually. So when I'm on this history for my medical information, there's no scroll bar to go down to the social environment. I either would click here on my sections panel, or I can use the arrows here to navigate into the next section. Now we're going to take a look at the components of the document themselves. In some cases, you will see these little star icons. They can be orange or they can be blue. An orange one indicates a mandatory field. Mandatory fields must be completed prior to be able to save the document at all. And you always want to save a document before you leave and go do something else, just so that you don't lose information that's there. And you can always open it up later to modify and add things. A blue star would indicate a significant field, which means that you could save it without having completed it, but the document would save as what we call incomplete. So it's just a reminder that that's a field that's important information. Your document will be saved as incomplete until you fill out the information in there. I don't think any of the social work documents have any significant fields. There's one mandatory field in the admission or the initial assessment, and that is just to capture the location of your interaction. So it'll be an admission, emergency or critical care, or an outpatient. Just a reminder that documents are only available on registered. So when we're talking outpatient, it's an in-hospital registered outpatient that you're encountering, which in the case of, say, renal or chemotherapy would be an outpatient visit and an outpatient encounter. There are a number of different types of fields. So we've got circles or radio buttons, date fields, free text fields, squares or multi-select. Sometimes there'll be drop-down boxes. So I haven't come across any of those. Sometimes there are number-only boxes. So we'll go through each of those. So circles or radio buttons are single select. When you have those, you can only select one. It's either one or the other or none. If you inadvertently select a radio button and you don't want to select one, clicking on it again will not clear it out. If you want to clear out a radio button, right-click, select Delete Data, and that will clear out any radio buttons. Squares are multi-select, meaning you can select as many as are applicable. Free text, you can just type in there. You can often enter a lot more text than what you can see in the block here. Most of them are set to 250, 500, some 5,000, sometimes 25,000 character limits. So If you find that you're entering text in certain fields and you're getting pop-ups that you're exceeding the character limit, just let me know and I can talk to the creators of the document and see if that it would be reasonable to increase character limits. Date and time fields, you have day, date, month, 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 so that's the letters and the year. Date and time fields you can free text into. They can be a little bit finicky if you don't enter it exactly as it expects, and then it keeps throwing an error saying it's not correct, and it'll do a pop-up on the screen that looks a lot more serious than it really is. Generally, I suggest using one of the autofills to start filling out. So if you go to the C, it's going to give you a calendar to pick a date, and that's fine if it's not a date and time field. T is kind of a T minus like 1 or 2, I think. Put that in there. The clock will give you a right now date and time. So insert now. So that's usually what I start with in a date and time field. And then if I need to adjust it, then I just click and I can adjust it from there. The date and time of referral. There's another one there for assessment completed date. And then the free text. Sometimes you will see these dots or ellipsis after a word, and anytime you see that, it means that when you click on it, it's going to pop up with additional observations. So if I click on this yes, you can see that it now pops up with surgery details. So it said, did the patient have surgery this visit? If I say yes, then it asks for surgery details. If I say no, that just disappears. Some sections are set to only accept numbers. So the status card number, for instance, if I try and enter letters in there, nothing happens. If I enter numbers in, if I put too many in and try to go to the next field, it will tell me that I've exceeded the maximum amount of numbers allowed. So if that pops up, that is what lets you control that. In some documents, you can pull in lab results or there's images, but there are none of those things in the social work documents. If you've had to do a late entry, we just like you to acknowledge that and put in the reason. So downtime refers to if the computer system was down and you couldn't get onto the computer in a timely manner and you're entering it afterwards when the system came back up. And then any other reason that you would have for doing a late entry as well. And that's just for auditing and tracking purposes to keep track of when we have downtimes or reasons for entering into something as late. As I mentioned before, you can have the preview set to the side to watch the note as it's going to be in the output as you create it, or you can finish entering all your information, and if you don't want to take up the extra side on the screen, you can toggle to a preview mode and take a look at it. So if I click on this preview button up at the top left, it's going to show me what my note's going to look like as when I save it, and then I can go back to create and keep entering information. So when I'm done entering information for my current time, I'm going to save it. So you want to select Save and Close, and then you're going to enter your computer password. You have to always enter your computer password every time you save a note so that it validates that the correct person logged into the computer, logged into SCM, is the person who's doing and completing the documentation. Now that you've saved the note, you can go to the Documents tab, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, and select your note and view it here. If this preview isn't set again on the side here, that is also a preference here. You would go to the preview icon and you can set how you want your previews to show. And the options panel on the left-hand side, there are a lot of different ways to filter documents. You can filter them by the actual name of the document, or if you just want to look at physician notes or just social work notes, you could go to the search by document name, and I could put in the social work and then a % or a wild card, and then it's just going to bring up all the social work notes, and then I can single click on them and review them over there. If I want to see the other documents, I can go to this. You can group them by date, which is their normal way that we do them. So the newest one is always at the top. You can also group them by document name or document category. In this case, social work is a category, MD is a category, and so on like that. So again, just different ways to sort and filter documents if you're looking for a more focused review on the information on the patient chart. If we want to edit or add something to that document, you're not going to go to the Enter Document icon because that will always launch a new one. You'll go to the Documents tab, select your document, and then you want to modify it. So there's a button in the Icons tab for Modify. You can right-click and select Modify. If you inadvertently double-clicked and opened it in a big window, Modify is also available from that field as well. That will reopen the document so that you can keep editing the document. And you'll notice that I've only typed in one field and my Save button's grayed out. You just have to click anywhere else on the screen. When you open a document to modify, it just has a filter where you have to click in two separate fields. And then you can save it again. And it will have updated. Because there can be times where more than one person charts on the same document, just going to show you how SCM keeps track of who enters information and when it's entered. With a document highlighted, you can go to View, and we're actually going to go to Corrections. And it'll open up a window. And if we scroll right to the bottom, we have an original version of the document. Anytime you see a row of asterisks going across the screen, that will tell you where there's been an edit or a modification or a change made. And then when you look at it, if it was a section where there was nothing before, it'll have placed a red C in there, indicating that this is a changed field. If you added something into the same field, it would strike out what was there previously and now display what is there this time in red. And if it was open for modification again, it would create another snapshot showing this is what was modified at this point in time by this person. So the system basically tracks every movement within the documents. Taking a look at the sections in the initial assessment, you've got your patient information section, healthcare directive, contact names, medical information and history, their social environment, work and education history, financial information, pre-admission status assessment, their baseline activities of daily living. This is one where you see the ellipsis here where they're either independent in all or dependent in. And when you click on that, it opens up a much larger assessment window. Baseline instrumental activities of daily living, risk screening, if there's any perinatal loss, intervention, consults, clinical summary assessment, plan of care. There's a discharge summary included in this initial assessment for an emergency department assessment where you're not doing ongoing charting and documentation, and then the late entry section. Looking at the other notes that are available for the social work program, the one you will use most consistently outside of the initial assessment will be the progress note. And when you click on it, you notice that this popped up. I was going to start a new progress note, and it says there's a social work progress note that already exists as a recovered document. And then I can choose one of the followings. I can retrieve the document and continue charting, create a new document, or cancel and return to SCM. So if I want to retrieve my document, I can click here and it will reopen it. Another way that you can do this, if you knew you were working in the middle of charting something and all of a sudden the power went out and the computer shut down and you thought you lost everything, when you get to this screen here and it says personal documents, if you click on that drop down, there's one that says document recovery, and it'll list the documents that you were charting on and can continue to chart on. The back end is set to save the document every 3 minutes, so you can continue charting on a document. So you can select the one that you want to continue, open it. It's currently locked. There. So then it's going to open it up here. So the progress notes, we're going to create a new one each day that you do document on them. If you always open the same one and keep charting on it, where you have an ongoing record, when you save it, the Documents tab is sorted by date. So if you were to keep reopening this social work document, it would always save it under the original date. So it can get very buried in the system. What you can do, though, is each day you can bring forward the days before using that copy forward. So we're just going to say I charted on this note on May 1st. I'm going to open a new one up for May 2nd. And I want to have the information I had on May 1st come forward into this one. So I'm going to go to copy forward. I'm going to find my progress note from the 1st. I'm going to expand it. I'm going to show what my documentation was. I want to copy this part in, copy it into my current note, and now it has brought my May 1st in. And then I can either hit enter at the top here and add May 2nd and add my notes from May 2nd. You'll notice that there is a spell check, words that are underlined in red. You can right click and correct. And when you are charting in a progress note, it's good to always put your date and time in and always put your signature at the end of an entry and your designation. And then you can save it. So each day you create a new one, and you might not create one every day. Sometimes there might be a gap in a day, but you can always bring forward from the previous days into this day's note. That way the note will always be up at the top and always have the most concurrent. So whether you do May 1st and May 2nd in this order, or when you open it up, instead of doing the May 1st up there, if you have the May 1st was the initial one, you can hit enter and put May 2nd below it. And those will be workflows that basically are departmental discussions. If you accidentally charted on the wrong patient or created a duplicate note on the same day, you can cancel that note. If you select the note that you would like to cancel, highlight it, and there's two ways to cancel it. If it's something that was on the wrong patient and you want to have a copy of it to transfer to the other one, you can highlight your words or your charting in that note and save it, copy it to the clipboard, and then you can paste it into a blank Word document. And then when you open the note on the right patient, you can copy and paste it back into that note. And then you can right click and cancel from here, cancel document. If you wanted to print it, you can double click on it. Your printer button is up here when you double click on it. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a cancel button. So when you cancel a document, it asks you to enter your reason for canceling. There are a couple canned ones in there as entered in the wrong patient, incomplete submitted on error. And if it's something that's not there, you can free text it in. Once you've canceled the document, it strikes it out. It never completely removes it from the chart. It leaves it in there as a canceled document. If I want to see what the reasoning was, I can go to the status and it will tell me what the reason was for canceling that document. The case conference note basically has other details and information for case conferences. It allows you to continue documenting on the same one for multiple meetings. You would just have to expand them as you required them. The encounter note is to document on encounters that you have with other family members during the visit. Up here it says mode of contact, incoming encounter, outgoing encounter, phone, walk-in, fax. Any of your charting has to occur on a visit when the patient's been registered in the hospital. But these are, family member, somebody who brings concerns up to you that is not the patient, that you wouldn't document commonly in your meeting documentation or your daily progress notes. It's to document sort of those one-off interactions with people outside of the client that are different than the daily documentation. And it makes it easier to identify them within the chart when you're looking for specific information. And the last one is this renal initial assessment. It's basically a progress note and a blank page, and this is intended for if a renal or dialysis patient is an inpatient. I know that renal uses, I think it's MIQS, which I hear is up for review and replacement. But right now, documentation happens into MIQS. In order to have the documentation or the information in the inpatient chart as well, so that the staff there sort of know what's been happening with the patient in renal, the staff that's working in there can actually just copy what they have in MIQS and paste it into this renal note here so that the information is also shared in the patient's inpatient record. We're going to briefly touch base on what co-signing looks like if you do choose to use it. So there are some departments, when they have students on the unit, they let the students do the charting, but they like to have the preceptor do a sign off on the documentation. And if you do decide to do that, you can have your students assign their preceptor as a co-signer. So in this case, I'm being the student and I'm going to open up a document that I'm going to chart on, but I want to assign my preceptor as my cosigner. So I'm going to go to the cosigner, check it off. Then it's going to ask me, who do I want to cosign? I'm going to select the other. I can search by last name. I'm going to use assign my preceptor. That's who I want to be the cosigner. So now if I hover over here, we can see we have a cosigner. Student will save it. And then when the preceptor is working, she would go to see that she has a document to co-sign. I'm just looking at the columns here, so we can add extra columns too. So if I go to a select column and I want to know the document status, and if there's co-signers, I can add those columns. And then I can see that there is a co-signer requested and who that I am the co-signer because I'm PCC1. And the note is in progress and it will always be in progress until it's been signed off on. So in order to sign off, I can reopen it and sign off. Another way to find the documents where I need to sign off on is to go to my patient list. And you'll see that there's a column here that says to sign and there's a red flag in it. If I wasn't logged in, if I was somebody else or another PC logging in, this would be a green flag showing that there is documents that need to be signed off as complete or signed off on, but it's not mine. The red ones indicate it's mine. You can double click on the red flag. Document is there. You can sign it from there. You can also sort. There might be multiple documents that need to be signed as complete. You can sort by provider and just select my signatures that are required. And then we can look at the details. We can double click on it here. It'll open up to review it. I can edit it. And you can make modifications if you need to. The flag is now gone. If I go back to the Documents tab, the cosigner is PCC1. It is now complete and no longer in progress. Another way to review information in the patient's chart, other than clicking through each of these individual tabs, so we've got our orders, results, patient info, which will give you demographics, the document review, flow sheets, clinical summary, which will give you a summary of information pulled from documents, and the visit record review is the other one. So you do have this tab. This one is specific to visit. So you've got this visit selected. If you wanted to look, say, at the emergency room visit or an older inpatient visit, you would select it from this drop-down list. And then it will load all the information from this visit. So it basically takes all these tabs and combines it into a single readable format with a table on the side where you can select which piece of the chart you want to actually be reviewing. So you can go specifically to flow sheets or documents and specific documents by ancillaries or nursing. What is listed here are documents that are available or information. So if you want to do vital signs, you click on that and it will load the vital signs for that patient. It's actually a nicer formatting than going to the flow sheets tab and reading it. Inpatient documentation. So you've got your admission note by hospitalist, nursing admission note if they've been completed, progress notes, and all other documents, which social worker ones fall under there. So if you click on those, these ones are not loaded facing. You just have to click on that button to view the document and it will load it and allow you to review it. So it's just another way of reviewing information in the chart. I think that pretty much covers it for documentation and all the bits and pieces. You'll have access to the training accounts for a while, so play around with it and let me know if you have any questions.